I'm Judd Myers.
I'm Scott Tipton.
Welcome to Blastoff. I'm Judd Myers.
I'm Scott Tipton.
And on our interview show today, we've got film legend, screenwriter, producer, everything you can possibly imagine, Carl Gottlieb. Chances are that if you've ever gone to the movies or watched television or listened to the radio, you have come across something that Carl has written. So tell me, Scott, what would be your favorite Carl Gottlieb moment?
He's most famous for Jaws, obviously.
Right.
And I came to Jaws very late. I didn't see it until I was probably a teenager. But the one of his films that I saw probably much earlier than I should have was The Jerk. And there's this moment in The Jerk where Steve Martin's character is delighted that he's in the phone book now, because Nathan Johnson is in the phone book. So now he's somebody, and he's happily dancing around the gas station where he works. Meanwhile, somebody has chosen his name from random to murder just because he decided to kill someone that day. And so Nathan Johnson is standing outside while the guy's up on the hills with a sniper rifle and taking pot shots at him. And all of a sudden, there's a big display of cans of oil next to Steve Martin, and the cans start popping and bursting from bullet fire. And Steve Martin looks over at the display and goes, "He hates these cans!" And I died when I saw this. I thought the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. This day, I cannot watch the "he hates these cans" scene without losing it. I didn't even know for years that was a Gottlieb project. I know with you, you're very invested in the whole Jaws.
It's
phenomenal.
Yeah, it's just it's so deep down in the ocean for me. It goes back to all of the. I mean, everybody has their Jaws story, and for me, it was like the bathtub. It wasn't safe. The pool wasn't safe. Anything that had anything to do with water, the sink while I was washing the dishes, like. It went really, really deep down for me, but also it's just all of the lines and I don't want to go too far into it because we do talk about it in the interview, but for me, seeing Jaws when I was a kid wasn't just about this was just the greatest, scariest movie ever. It was about the writing. I couldn't believe how much it affected me, how invested I was in the characters, how structurally to me it was just wow that somebody could make a monster movie that was like a classic film. To me, it was like silver screen monsters. It was, to me, that everything about it just stayed with me. And as a reader, a lover of movies, a lover of television, a lover of comic books, somehow that captured something. And the fact that it was written by a guy who has roots in comedy and improvisation makes it all that much sweeter. So we go deep into that in this conversation, and if nothing else, you will all find that even after all this time, it is still not safe to go back in the water. Okay, so I don't normally do this, but our guest today has so many credits and so many varied things that he's done throughout his career that I don't think I'm going to have enough time to cover all of them. So I'm going to do something here that will introduce you a little bit to who this man is. And for all of you out there who are thinking of having a career in film, television, theater, just take a listen and really try to close your eyes for a second and imagine this. These people have spoken the words that this man has written. Steve Martin, Richard Pryor, Dan Aykroyd, George Burns, the Smothers Brothers, Bob Newhart, Flip Wilson, Freddie Prinze, Paul Williams, Tony Randall, Jack Klugman, Chevy Chase, Carl Reiner, Rob Reiner, Ringo Starr, Dennis Quaid, Shelley Long, Roy Scheider, Richard Dreyfuss, and Robert Shaw. These people have been directed by our guest, Rob Reiner again, Kevin Pollak, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Christopher Guest, John Ritter, Rosanna Arquette, Michelle Pfeiffer, Paul Reiser, Carrie Fisher, Terry Garr, Elliot Gould, Carol Kane, Kelsey Grammer, Steve Martin, Buck Henry, David Letterman, Paul Simon, Harvey Korman, George Burns, Roddy McDowall, Terry Garr again. He has acted with and for Robert Altman, Steven Spielberg, Irvin Kershner, Gary Marshall, Penny Marshall, James Burrows, Robin Williams, Amy Heckerling, and John Landis. And he produced an extremely important documentary that featured some of the most important musicians in American history. Joan Baez, David Crosby, Joni Mitchell, Graham Nash, Stephen Stills, Neil Young, and many others. And he just happened to have written a little film about a big fish called Jaws. And he did a making-of book, The Jaws Log, which was not only the largest-selling book of its kind in publishing history, but widely used as a study guide for some of the greatest writers and directors in the history of cinema. I very strongly suggest you read it. Our guest for today is none other than Carl Gottlieb. Carl, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
You say that you never read comic books.
Yeah.
So why is that? What's the reason behind that?
As a little kid, 6 years old, 7-year-old, comics were a dime in those days, which was actually a lot of money for me. But I saved my money. I would buy a dime. Occasionally I would spend 25 cents for one of the big ones. But then my father, being a good dad, took me down to 4th Avenue in New York before it was Lower Park Avenue. 4th Avenue below 14th Street in New York used to be Booksellers Row. The only store left there is the Strand bookstore. But before this, and the Strand was always there. It's been there for 100 years.
Right, yeah.
But in 1950, there were 30 bookstores lining the street, some specialty bookstores, general bookstores, and they had barrels of books, 2 for a nickel or a dime.
They were just thrown in there.
Yeah,
big barrels of books.
Big barrels of books. And on shelves, too, you could buy used books for 10 cents or 15 cents. And I remember I had saved my allowance. I had 50 cents or $1. And I bought I think for 50 cents, I bought 8 hardcover books, like 2 Bomba the Jungle Boy, a Tom Swift, a Jack London, Call of the Wild, Arthur Conan Doyle, The White Company, which was a swashbuckler that he wrote before Sherlock Holmes. And it took me, days, and I was a fast reader, so it took me days to devour. I would read a comic book, and I could read it at the counter before I sat down. But here were like 8 for the price of 5 comic books, which would take me a total of 45 minutes to read. I got 8 hardcover books. I never went back. I never read comic books again. I said, "Why? I mean, look what's out there in the world of hardcover," which was everything: Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, Jack London. All the pulp westerns, Max Brand, who created Hopalong Cassidy. No, Clarence Mulford created Hopalong Cassidy. I read the Hopalong Cassidy series in hardback before them, probably simultaneously with the serials. So once I had been exposed to that world, I would never go back. So I never bought a comic book again. I mean, I would read them if they I came across them. And so it was very hard for me to get graphic novels, because to me they were just like comic books. Those are the things I stopped reading when I was 10. But when I look at them again, I look at Alan Moore's work and I go, "Oh, okay, this guy knows what he's doing." But it, like I say, hardcover spoiled me for comics.
Do you remember the first book that you read that stayed with you, that it feels like it changed you? Or
I remember when I was 8 or 9 years old, taking violin lessons, my cousin, who was already an accomplished violinist and a prodigy, and his father was my teacher, gave me a complete set of Sherlock Holmes. The full, it was a 1-volume, complete Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes. And it took me probably a couple of weeks to read it, because it was The Sign of the Four and The Hound of the Baskervilles and 40 short stories. And between Arthur Conan Doyle and C.S. Forrester, who wrote the the Hornblower series, between those two and some pulp mysteries by a guy named Frank Gruber, who wrote wrote for Black Mask and those, and science fiction. I felt, the Robert Heinlein was my first exposure. So Heinlein, C.S. Forrester, Conan Doyle, I read them before I was 12 and, never forgot.
All of these fantastical things, and it seems like because of your roots in improvisation and comedy, which are, both of those things are so grounded in reality. They're it's so much about the guy on the street almost. It's interesting that you remember your way in to the world of story through the fantastical.
Exactly.
And yet you've made a career on people talking to one another.
Yeah. I think that's because as I grew up, the skeptical nature of me understood that the real world is not the world that I wanted to be a part of. I couldn't go to space with Heinlein. I couldn't solve crimes with Sherlock. I couldn't be on the deck of a frigate at sea fighting the French. So I realized, wait, the real world is so different that there's comedy there, there's material there, there's, this is the world we live in and this is the world we dream about. Somehow there's not much of an intersection. I might have written science fiction if I'd been led that way, but that my life didn't take that path.
Do you ever find that now because you've had a very varied career in the arts, that you wake up and say, I'd like to try to write something that is outside my comfort zone? Because every writer does have a comfort zone.
Oh, yeah. I mean, earlier when I said I only write for money, the pictures I told you about were written on speculatively. Writing is so lonely and difficult and painful that you don't willingly subject yourself to that. I don't. I mean, I like my comfort too much. I like just, hanging out with the cat and watching mindless television and, puttering around the kitchen and spending time on the internet and posting to Facebook. That, the idea of sitting down to write something serious is daunting, and it's a lot, it's a lot of work, and there's no guarantee of a payday at the end of it.
Right.
So, I don't have a burning magnum opus that I want the world to see. I'm a storyteller. I like to, I identify with Noel Coward. I should only be so lucky. I should only be so talented. But Noel Coward, in a moment of self-deprecation, wrote his autobiography, actually, is titled A Talent to Amuse, because he never wrote deep theater. He wasn't Arthur Miller. He wasn't Eugene O'Neill. But he wrote, Hay Fever, in a week, crossing the Atlantic on a boat. And it became a Broadway play that ran for years and is still, considered a marvel of play construction.
Yes.
So,
have you ever written a play? Have you?
No. That's probably where I should go next if I ever do anything.
It seems to me,
serious.
with all of your roots and all the things that you've come from, that would be the thing that would be most apropos of okay, now I feel like doing something.
Yeah, if I could write in a new area, or if I could break some ground or get out of my comfort zone, I would love to write a play. But I have to find a company to write for, even if it's a local bunch of 99-seat waiver actors. I know it's tough.
There are so many writers, actors, directors, people who, certainly in this town, we're in a steel town with entertainment being the steel, that they feel pigeonholed. Like, this is what I do. I want to do these other things, but this is what they keep giving me. And it's always strange because someone like you says, well, this is what I am and this is what I've been doing and that's what I wanted to do. Yeah. It seems the majority of people are all saying, I want to do this other thing.
Oh, well, more fools they. I mean, like I said earlier, my criteria for accepting even paid employment is, have I done this before? Fortunately, if somebody comes to me to write a screenplay, obviously I haven't written that screenplay before. I've written other screenplays, but never that one.
Right.
But, for example, had I stayed in television, I probably would have created a show sooner or later that would probably have been a hit. Or if not, I would be an executive producer. And I could have made a very comfortable figure annual living just writing television.
Yeah.
But, features were more fun. Producing commercials. I once produced commercials for a while. It's always more fun to do stuff that's new. And of course, then the problem is when you get to be my age, there's not much that's new. Except live theater. Except live theater.
Yeah, yeah.
I've produced live theater. I mean, benefit shows and things like that. But the actual play that runs for a while, even local waiver house, never done that.
Never directed or
nope.
Wow. Yes, there's something there, kid.
Well, if you're listening to this out there and you have an idea that I might be right for, or that you think I might help, call the boss here.
Isn't it interesting that you talked about your roots before in Syracuse, had a great journalism program, but you sort of ended up being more theatrical, improvisational, stage managing, writing, directing, doing all of the many things that people maybe now don't get a chance to do because you can't. Somebody says, I'm a director. Somebody says, I'm a writer. And you're sort of put in that pocket.
Yeah.
You say journalism was not something that you were interested in doing, or you were interested in it, but it didn't, take you in that direction. But yet you've done documentaries. I think that's a form of journalism. It
is. I like documentaries, and I have ideas about how they should be made. And it's wonderful because it combines improvisation with which is something I know about, with filmmaking, which is also something I know about. But you're filmmaking or telling a story using reality as your source material. There's no actors, there's no lines. There are characters who you may favor. There's a wonderful series on Nat Geo, I think, or one of those, Deadliest Catch, about Alaskan fishermen. And boy, you get, there's like 6 different skippers or 4 different skippers or 4 different ships, and you get to know them. You're out with them. You're watching them solve problems. And one of them actually dies during the course of the 6 seasons. I enjoy that. That's real. The documentary is reality observed.
How did you go from with an improvisational troupe and doing these things and figuring it out to doing a documentary about some of the most important singers and artists and musicians in American history?
Joan Baez's sister, Mimi Farina, was a member of the committee for a brief period. She was married to my roommate. And at one point, before my roommate married Mimi, I guess they were keeping company, Joan Baez was producing this folk festival in Big Sur, the Big Sur Folk Festival, which she would host every year. Mm-hmm. And in the summer of '69, there was a Big Sur Folk Festival, and I got a call. My then wife and I had been in television and had done music scenes, so I kind of understood production. They said, we're going to be doing this folk festival, and there's going to be some big names there. And can you put together a crew? Can you shoot it? Because we want to make a documentary. I think they're filming. There's a thing going on in Woodstock, or White Lake it was called. There's a thing going on upstate New York that's very big, and some of the same people are coming to do our show 2 weeks later. So we'd like to film it. So on a minimal amount of time, I found some filmmakers, and they found their friends who were sound recordists and technicians, and we filmed the festival. The festival put up the money from the gate receipts to pay the people to record it. And then we ran out of money, and I learned the first lesson of producing: never put your own money into a project. But I did put my own money in it just to get the film finished. And I was deeply in the hole. But then after it was almost finished, it was work print, we showed it to a theater owner named Ted Mann Theaters. Mm-hmm. And he liked it. He wanted to produce, he wanted to buy it. And he wanted somebody to distribute it, and he had a relationship with Fox. So he went there. He said, look, you buy this film from me, I'm going to buy it from Carl and Allison and from the foundation, and you buy it from me. I guarantee you I'll play it in all my theaters. And Mann had 300 or 400 screens at that time. Mm-hmm. So we sold the film. We got our money back. We paid everybody all the deferments. Fox released the film. Sadly, it took a year and a half to do that. And in the meantime, Woodstock had come out, and so had Mad Dogs and Englishmen, which was the Joe Cocker tour. So the market was pretty saturated with music documentaries, and ours was deficient in that we had to record it hurriedly. And we didn't have 16-track sound. We didn't have trucks. We had, we were just working in monaural sound from the board mix, from the PA mix. So there was no album involved, and nobody signed releases for an album. They just signed releases for their film performance. So it was in heavy rotation on HBO about 5-10 years ago. It ran a lot, and it still surfaces as a quaint little artifact of that time. Because there's Crosby, Stills, and Nash wearing the exact same outfits that they wore on stage in Woodstock. See Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. John Sebastian wearing his tie-dyes. It was...
Was this a lifelong relationship you had with David Crosby? Because,
yes.
You wrote his two autobiographies.
No, Crosby and I go back to when I first got to San Francisco in 1963. The Byrds were the house band at a go-go bar up the street.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they had not. Their first record had not yet been released, and they were playing wherever they could. So they had a job as the house band. So we became acquainted then, and then just stayed friends as the record came out, and the Byrds became big, and then he got thrown out of the Byrds and would hang out with us. And by that time, when we were playing in Los Angeles in '68, David was between bands. So he would come down and play with us sometimes, and then at the same time he was singing with Graham and with Stephen, and then they became Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and we just stayed friends the whole time. We're still friends. I was just at his 75th birthday party 3 weeks ago.
It's fascinating seeing the distance that happens and how people stay connected. You've touched so many people over the years. You sort of. Okay, here I'm working with you and now you're gone, and I'm working with you and now you're gone, and it's a new family every single time.
Yeah, I was going to, if I ever wrote an autobiography, I was going to call it Peripheral Vision, because I've watched all this stuff out of the side of my eye while I was focusing on whatever actual job I had at the time.
Do you think that consistency, was it easier to be consistent during a time where the entertainment industry was still trying to figure itself out? Certainly in America, it was, we were still young and trying to work out what was happening, what worked, what didn't. Now it's a very different sort of world. You could go from one job to another, to another, to another, and you could pivot and go, well, in this job, I'm kind of writing it, but really I'm kind of directing it. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that now it might be difficult? You teach, you're on the faculty of what, 3-4 universities?
Well, no, I have taught at USC and AFI and UCLA and University of Miami, but just a semester at a time, a year at a time. So I have my teaching credentials. Academic credibility. I think I don't have a credential. I don't even have a master's. It was, I don't know what I would do if I was coming into the industry now. On the other hand, there are many more opportunities, and even self-made opportunities. The technology is now within grasp. You couldn't make a movie for $10,000, then. Now you can. You can make a presentable feature for under $100,000.
Right.
If the cameras and the technology is somebody once said that film won't be an art like novel until a camera is as inexpensive as a pencil. Well, we're not quite there yet, but you can write a novel with on a manual typewriter or with a pencil and longhand. You can shoot a movie on a cell phone. There's a film in the theaters now that was shot on a cell phone. Tangerine.
Right. That's right.
So it's not a big feature. It's not my pirate movie, but there's more opportunities. And I think it's probably what's troubling for entry-level artists now is that they're bewildered by the variety of choice. When I was coming up, there was like 3 networks, 7 studios, and independent films, which you could break out. John Cassavetes did very well, but it was a limited universe, and if you concentrated on finding a place within it, you generally could. If you had talent, I mean, obviously you have to have the talent, and nobody wants to be the one to tell somebody you don't have talent, because it's a hard judgment to make subjectively.
Do you think that there's a missing ethic in that? You said, I'm only going to work in the entertainment industry, whatever it has to be. I will pick up these bags and I'll take them around the set, and I'll do while I'm writing and doing the things that I'm doing. There's a lot of people now, certainly a lot of younger people who are performing, writing, directing, who say, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that. I'd rather tend bar and make more money and then, just do the thing that I want to do. Well, or do you think they might benefit from being inside of it, around it, breathing it, seeing an opportunity where it might not have presented itself before? I'm on the studio lot already.
Totally. I mean, there are more fools for not taking advantage of any exposure. First of all, you learn more in a week on a set than you learn in 4 years of film school in the real world, in my opinion. But more importantly, the thing that you learn and the thing that you avail yourself of if you come up my way is you become part of a community of artists, a community of writers. And in a business where so much depends on relationships, if you are a participating member of a community of artists, then work opportunities will arise. I mean, somebody will be doing something and need a dialogue punch up, and you're there, so you'll do it. But you wouldn't have gotten that job had you not been hanging around for the fun of hanging around,
right?
Or to be a part of the community, or to support your pal in his low budget adventure. So as long as everybody's in the community of artists, it becomes a self-actualizing experience that propels your career. You can look at, the French Impressionists. I mean, they all knew each other. They drank together. They painted. They were fiercely competitive and opinionated, but they were part of a community of artists. And every great theater writer that I can think of, or most, at one time or another, wrote for a company of actors, starting with Shakespeare. Shakespeare, Molière, Eugene O'Neill, David Mamet, Tom Stoppard wrote for actors that they knew, and that's helpful.
Right? Yeah. I mean, even Harold Pinter, like you, would write plays and act in them. The plays that he wrote. That I think maybe David Mamet and Tom Stoppard are all 3 of them have the same sort of language. That staccato kind of language. Definitely not as comedic as you are.
No, but the comedy community is an outgrowth of the improvisational style, whether it's Upright Citizens Brigade or Key and Peele, Colbert, all the Second City alumni for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
Improvisational theater, in my opinion, has been one of the great moving forces of the theater. Just as Stanislavski and the group theater experience of the 20s, 30s, and 40s shaped American theater during the Arthur Miller era, improvisational theater has shaped certainly comedy for the last 30 years.
And do you think you're writing, being someone in improvisation where you have to constantly turn on a dime, somebody did this, so I have to do that. In writing, certainly must have been for television, it must have been like that.
Yeah.
Where it's so fast, and you have an actor, I mean, you worked with extraordinary actors, some extraordinary comedians who would just do something that would change the nature of what it is that you wrote.
Yeah. One of the greatest, one of the funniest scenes in The Jerk is an absolute improvisation by Steve, who just said, can I try this take? I'm not sure what I'm going to say, but just keep it rolling. And Carl Reiner said, sure, because Carl Reiner came from a similar background with your shows. And Steve said, I spent the last 3 days, it seemed like a week. But a week seemed like 40 days. But last year seemed like 3 days. It's a long run like that.
Yeah.
It's very funny, and he made it up on the spot, being the genius that he is.
Yeah. You guys are obviously close. You've worked together on more than one occasion.
Mm-hmm. Not recently.
Okay. Have you found, say, we saw Mel Brooks recently talking about Gene Wilder and this sort of muse thing where someone will write something or direct something and find that this person is the exemplification of what it is that their voice. Have you ever found that? Is there someone who you say, it just seems like they just totally get what it is that I put on the page? Or when you're behind the camera, or where you...
That's the miracle of actors. I am stunned by it every time I see it happen. You create a character, and you think, well, Richard Pryor is a great, two comics that I've worked with who also actors, Richard Pryor and Catherine O'Hara, are two examples of people for whom you write dialogue. And then when they perform it, they so inhabit the character that they come up with inflections and pauses and deliveries that you never thought of. And as a writer, you go, you're writing, you try the line, you hear how it sounds. Does it fall trippingly from the tongue? And then along comes an actor and says it in a way you never heard it, even in your own head, and you created it. You go, wow. And that's what actors do. That's their genius, is they take these words that have been structured very carefully and they say them, they memorize them, and then they say them so it sounds like they just thought of it. That's why there's a famous line in a movie called The Bad and the Beautiful, which is a great Hollywood movie about Hollywood, where the guy says, writers, he says, people don't think anyone writes movies. I think the actors make it up as they go along. That's the genius of the actor. They're able to say it like it just happened.
Do you have I say favorite. It's a terrible word, I think, to describe something that affected you as a film, or that really you can think of and say, boy, I enjoy that every time I see it. Because people say that about Jaws. I mean, I do. Yeah, it comes on and I watch, even though I've seen it a million times, I keep it on.
It's that way with Godfather. If I happen to see it, I always say, okay, I'm just going to watch till Wilfredo gets killed on the causeway, and then I'm going to go to bed. And then, an hour and a half later, I've watched the whole movie again. I have some odd moments from movies that nobody knows. There's a couple of scenes in a 1939 movie called Prisoner of Zenda, which is my favorite, where there's a scene that whenever I see it, I weep. It's that good.
What is the scene?
Oh, do you know the plot of Prisoner of Zenda?
Yes.
Okay. It's when he has been revealed to the princess that he's not the king, and the rightful king is who she should marry. Mm-hmm. And he says to her, "Come away with me. You don't have to stay here." And I'm welling up now. She says, "Help me be the queen that I was born to be."
Wow.
So go figure. I'll have to recover from this. I too easily, it's very funny. I actually talked to a therapist about this. There is some nostalgic, if somebody touches the right nostalgia chords in me, generally about show business, I weep. But Get Smart did a two-parter in which the Don Adams character, they lifted the plot and did a version of it.
Again, now I have so much to go in search of now.
They even copied the last shot, because the Englishman, Rudolph Rassendyll, having shown the king the error of his ways, so the king becomes a good king.
Right.
And the loyal Colonel Zapf, played by C. O. Smith, and young David Niven, escort him to the border where he's on a horse. He's going to ride back to, across the border, take the train, go back to England. He rides up a trail, White Horse rears. And Get Smart, they copied that shot.
Of all places, of all places for that to appear.
Anyway, Prisoner of Zenda makes me cry. TCM every now and then airs it, but it's if you ever get a chance to see it uncut, and it's very corny and slow moving in places. But I am told by Carl Borak, a producer who is also an Olympic fencer, that it was some of the best fencing in movies ever done. So if you're a student of swashbucklers, there's some terrific saber work.
See, you are talking about how, like, the fantasy and the comic book, like, to me, the thing that touches you so deeply is fantastical.
Oh, yeah.
It's swashbuckling. It's kings and queens and horses and armies and... Absolutely.
That's what dragged me in this business in the first place.
It's Arthurian legend. I mean...
Yeah. Because when you're a kid and you discover that stuff, that's, those are my formative experiences. And, everybody who has ever come to Hollywood has dreamed about that first day on the lot when you go to the commissary and there's a pirate and a cowboy.
Right.
That's the world we all wanted to be a part of.
Did you watch Cowboys and Indians on TV like every other kid? I mean, there you are in New York City. Where in New York? Was it New York City or was it in Brooklyn?
New York City, northern Washington Heights.
Okay, all right. Your friends, your East Coast friends, were you playing stickball in the street? Were you?
Sure, we did all that. We did all that dead end kid stuff, except we didn't swim in the East River. You could swim in the Hudson at that point, but nobody did. And it was the tail end of the radio era, so my first experience with science fiction. I started reading the pulps, Fantastic Adventures and Amazing Stories. And,
which you got at the newsstand.
Yes.
For
25 cents.
25 cents.
And there were 2 science fiction shows on radio, Dimension X and something else. There was another one. I remember the transition to television. I mean, when I was a little kid, there was only radio. And then one of the first television shows besides Howdy Doody and it was, Hopalong Cassidy was a huge success. And there was a show called Space Patrol. Tom Corbett's Space Cadet or something like that.
Right.
And it was a show about, space. And it was all live television with weird, like improvised effects, little miniatures.
Things hanging on strings.
Yeah, very, very primitive, but, for the time, effective. So, I was immersed in the world of books, romantic adventures and Kipling and stuff like that. And I was lucky enough to go to the movies during the era of the big studio pirate movies. We haven't seen a good pirate movie in 50 years.
Oh, I know.
We've seen some poor attempts. Yeah. Master and Commander was not bad.
Yeah.
But that's not a pirate movie. That's not a genre film as I remember it. And I grew up treasuring 2 genres which are now essentially non-existent, especially in television, the Western and the pirate film. Anything that smacks of that, and Star Wars and the whole Star Wars thing is essentially, a Saturday serial,
right,
with $1 billion budget,
right.
When you add up all the pictures, as Lucas's vision was to make a like Indiana Jones was a swashbuckler,
Yeah.
So there's always been an appetite for that, and I think there always will be. I mean, the martial arts films are in some ways a weird version of a fantasy superhero.
Oh, sure.
So,
yeah.
So there is that. The tradition lives on.
Did your parents, because I know you say they were supportive of you and your imagination, and your dad said, what did he say? He said, do what you...
Whatever you do what you like. Be like, don't do a job that you're not happy in.
Did they encourage you read more books?
They had to stop me from reading books. I mean, I was ruining my eyes,
Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would read. I'd stay up at night reading. I would just read. I mean, the school was essentially for most of elementary school and high school, my constant refrain was, Carl is not living up to his potential. And that's because I would read we'd get the textbooks for the year. I'd read them in the first week. And then I'd have to sit there for the rest of the semester.
Bored,
with, and I would sneak a book to read inside another, inside a school book and stuff like that.
Do you think reading because there are a lot of would-be writers now who have real trouble getting through a book.
Yeah, well, they can't write then.
You believe that
I
reading
believe
is
they
essential?
Essential. Of course. It's like being a blind painter. If you don't read, how can you write? I mean, you're just not exposed to your art.
Yeah.
You know, if you can't sit down and read a novel, I don't know how you can pretend to write a story, much less a novel. You have to live among words, know their ways.
Do you ever remember as a kid sitting down and writing a story that was about the swashbucklers or the West?
No, I was content to read about it, and then and maybe act it out. I had a BB gun. There was no bird or frog safe if I was out hunting.
Do you think your old friends from New York said when you started being successful, when your name started popping up everywhere, do you think they would have said, "Oh, of course. Well, that makes sense that he would."
No, I don't think so, because I was something of a nerd. If you were bookish in 1950 with teenage boys, that was not, it wasn't a good thing. So they remember that I was smart. I'm still friends, or I occasionally see friends that I knew in grammar school, literally 65 years ago. And a couple of them have shared memories of me. Teacher would try to surprise me with a question while I was reading, obviously something else. And I would look up from my science fiction book buried in the history text, and she'd say, "Well, when was the Battle of Vicksburg?" And I would say, 1863, Confederate Army met, under Burnside, met so-and-so at the cemetery, or whatever the details of the battle were, and then I go back to my book. And teacher couldn't catch me because I knew it anyway. I had read the book, so I remembered the text. And I counsel, I have some godsons and daughters and, children of nieces and nephews, and I probably counsel them inappropriately, but I said, look, school, if you're going to at least get through school, think of yourself as a sponge, and they're pouring water on you, all this information. Just soak it up, and then when they ask you, but just squeeze yourself and regurgitate what you've absorbed, and they'll leave you alone after that. So
that's a good way to do it, is paint that picture.
Yeah.
Simple. Very simple.
You're a sponge.
Is there anyone that you see now, filmmakers, playwrights, directors, that you feel like this is someone who's important. This is someone who's doing things that I think changes the game?
Oh, hard to say. It's been so long since I've been taken by a movie. And part of that is, just the cynicism of an old professional. You know the tricks. You go, oh yeah, right. Something's going to pop up in the foreground any minute. Yeah, there it is. Oh my soul, I'm so scared. There are a few people who I wish didn't take themselves so seriously, like James Cameron and Ridley Scott. Who's the dead one? Ridley or the other one? There's two, the Scott brothers.
Tony Scott.
Tony is the one who died.
Yes.
Okay. Ridley Scott, certainly knows how to do that stuff, the stuff I love. Cameron could do it. James Cameron could do it if he wasn't so full of himself and didn't attack such major themes. I mean, I would love to see James Cameron working in the studio system, having to do a pirate movie with assigned actors that he didn't cast, a script that he didn't write, and shoot it in 42 days, with 3 days on the water. And, because that's how they made The Black Swan and, all the other pictures, pirate movies we like. So of the modern guys, I was very much taken with McGee after The Fugitive. I thought that was a great job of action directing.
Yes.
It's hard to find people who can do what they did, what the old timers did. They don't have the background. I remember Spielberg complaining. I once ghost wrote a speech for Spielberg. He was, I think, giving an award to Fred Zinnemann. And I echoed, I didn't so much write the speeches, I just remembered some things that Steven said and wrote them down for him to say again. And he was saying, and he said, look, even I'm Steven Spielberg. I won't get to make half the number of movies that my favorite directors made in their careers. Michael Curtiz, John Ford. Those guys made like 50, 100 features in their lifetimes. And they went from one to the next. They'd make 2, 3 movies a year. You don't get to do that anymore. So consequently, you don't quite learn the craft as well as you should. Most artistes today don't have a people's background. They've never sold popcorn. They haven't toiled in regional theater or they haven't had to tell stories in episodic television. The best writing being done now is being done in episodic television.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
No question about it. There's more going on in Breaking Bad and in the Sopranos than in 90% of the film noirs that were ever made.
That is very, very true.
And it's there every week, and it's on. You can watch it at home whenever you want.
And the actors and directors.
And of course, the work is exemplary.
They're flocking to it because they can do it over and over and over again, and maybe even stay at home with their families while they're doing it.
There's a lot to be said for doing it until you get it right.
So you think constraints are sometimes helpful?
Absolutely. For a long time, painters worked within the dimensions of their canvas. It's not until this century that people, with the exception of muralists, it's not until this century that people, the 20th century, that people started making pictures that were larger than the rooms in the museums, or making installations. That sort of art.
Is there a fine artist that is a favorite of yours?
No. I mean,
do you have anything hanging on your wall at home that's a print or something that's a?
I have an Audubon print, which I love. I had an Escher print for a long. I had some Eschers for a long time that I liked. I liked Escher because of how he bent reality, and I'm a sucker for illustrative art. I mean. Picasso's, the works that he did was that he was 19 or 20, which are academy paintings, Doctor and Patient. They're stunning. And I liked Norman Rockwell long before it was fashionable to like Norman Rockwell, long before Spielberg started collecting them. Guys who would cast a picture perfectly and paint it. So that there was
he was
a story.
The epitome of nostalgia, American nostalgia.
Yeah, Norman Rockwell's great, but now there's Lucian Freud maybe. Like some of his work, but I don't know the modern artists.
For youth culture now, and there you are, you're teaching youth culture
because of comic books. By the way, I treasure that I was exposed to Jack Elder, Will Elder, and Jack Davis.
Yeah, Jack Davis.
During their EC Comics days.
Yes.
Because those comics I did look at because they were prohibitive. Prohibited.
They said don't look at it.
Yes.
The youth culture of today, which is stuck on the news feeds and the little tiny bites of information. And you teach these kids sometimes, you go and do classes. Do you see their attention span being prohibitive to their ability to craft a story?
Judging from some of the stories or most of the stories I've read by new writers, I mean, they have difficulty sustaining a narrative beyond, I won't say 140 character limit, but attention spans are shorter. It's harder for people to become involved in a story to the degree that their ancestors were. I suppose that if you take any audience, even millennials, even 10-year-olds, and you put them in front of, just force them into a theater at gunpoint and say, okay, now you're going to watch Gone with the Wind, and now you're going to watch Magnificent Seven or The Wild Bunch or Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times. I think they'll stay with it, but I suspect that they will get restless during the moments when nothing's breaking or falling. That's a tragedy because they will lack the sense of empathy and participation that a good story imposes on you. When you're reading a good story, when you're reading a great writer, you get lost in the words, you get lost in the work, or you should. And it just gets harder for them to become immersed. And immersion, I think, is the key to understanding.
when you're writing, are you working on a keyboard? Are you working on...
I work on a keyboard because I started on computers early, so I was into word processors in the early 80s. In 85, I think I had my first computer.
Being the early nerd that you were.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, here, that's good stuff.
Yeah.
In our world,
yeah.
you're you know.
I was writing on a computer before DOS. I was writing on a computer in CPM.
Reverence.
Yeah, I write on a keyboard. I outline in pencil. I outline on legal pads and 3x5 cards, and I pin the 3x5 cards on a bulletin board where I can see them while I'm typing. Sometimes I will transcribe the handwritten notes into text notes that I load into a file, and then I will open the screenplay software, and I'll put my outline as prose text at the end of the file. Well, first I'll start the file with the prose text, and the first index card will say, main titles, introduce Bozo the Clown, the lead character. So then I start typing, fade in, here's Bozo, blah, blah, blah. Then I delete that card, and I go on to the next card and write that. And at any point in the script, if I'm lost, I can scroll down to see where the story's going.
Right.
I scroll back to see what I did with the preceding part. Then out of that comes a finished script, and my file notes still exist as a separate file, but I've used that as a template. And Movie Magic, which is a terrific screenwriting software, better than Final Draft, in my opinion. Movie Magic permits you to go into what they call word processing mode, so you can just put prose into your screenplay without worrying about formatting.
Yeah.
And then you format the software will format as you go if you're writing it in screenplay style.
It just allows you to throw your ideas right there.
Yeah, exactly.
As you go.
Yeah.
It sounds like, mountain climbers who say, you have the top of the mountain, you know what it looks like, but lower your goals, you're getting to that rock. Yeah. And then once you get to that rock, you're getting to that rock.
Right. And you have a vague idea of you know what route you're going to take. It's a very apt analogy. You know where you're starting, you know where you're going to finish. Very important to know where you're going to finish, where the top of the mountain is. And then on the journey, you will discover things. You'll discover characters that interest you. You'll discover a subplot that might be of interest. And that makes for a lot of work because you have to go back and lay the groundwork, the exposition for that stuff. But ultimately, your story is that much more rewarding because it's not just going A to B. Anybody can walk across the street. But to walk to the top of Everest, you got to do some planning.
That's right. Although for the first time I went into Harlan Ellison's house, he said, I have to draft something up, and he went into the other room, and I just heard. He has this old typewriter that he writes with 2 fingers, his index fingers, and carbon copy inside.
That's old school. I wrote like that for a long time. I remember I was reluctant to transition to an electric typewriter because I was so used to banging it out on manual. And then I transitioned to JAWS was written on a IBM Selectric, and then in '85 when computers came along, I said, "Oh, this is a wonderful tool because you can cut and paste and delete. And, you can write a bunch of stuff and then pull it up when you need it."
But there's no way you could do that on set. If you have, certainly during the time of JAWS, there was no. You were there like scratching things out.
Oh yeah, no. On JAWS, there's the whole movie was essentially 3 pages of 8x10 typing paper, scotch taped in a long column with Act 1, Scene 1 at the top and finale down at the bottom, and it was pinned over my bulletin board. And I would check things off as I went through it.
It's funny that you're this comedy writer, improvisational guy brought in to punch up the humor, and then really it's just we need a good writer. Oh my God, we have a good writer here. Let's do that. I need you to make this all work together. And isn't that interesting that you can be, I'm a specialist in comedy, I'm a specialist in drama, but really at the end of the day, you have to be able to craft you have to be able to craft a story, a beginning and middle and an end.
Yep.
JAWS kind of it's a monster movie, but it's got all of the elements that you could plug it into another format.
I argue with my screenwriting professor colleagues who are just enamored of stupid Robert McKee and his formulaic book about screenwriting. Jaws is a 2-act movie. It's not a 3-act movie. Act 1 ends when they go out to sea. That's the curtain of Act 1, is the shot through the jaws as the little boat heads out Menemsha Bay in Menemsha Harbor.
Right.
And Act 2 is the finale, Men Against the Sea.
The chase.
The chase.
Have you written other movies like that with that sort of 2-act structure?
I don't worry too much about act structure. I mean, it's an academic exercise. If you're telling a story, the act breaks will come where they will. Because if you're telling a story and you're engaging an audience, you're going to complicate the story. You're going to resolve the complications. You're going to introduce new wrinkles. You're going to throw in a final complication, and then you've got to tie up the loose ends and resolve the story so that the hero wins or loses, or the protagonist achieves his objective or fails nobly or ignobly. It depends. Stories about failures can be just as interesting as stories about success, but you have to be involved with the characters. You have to care what happens to the people.
The Jaws log, I definitely suggest anyone listening, if you haven't read it, you really should. Certainly if you're into the idea of screenwriting, directing, anything that has to do with that industry, the filmmaking industry, but not just filmmaking, but writing and performers. Absolutely read it. I remember, maybe I'm wrong, but I remember a recurring thing of obviously the shark isn't working and breaking down and things. But it seems to me that the idea that you were talking about is that's okay. I mean, it's bad that it's happening, but you're going back to the script and back to the script and back to it's about the people, and not about the monster. The monster is
monster. Stephen and I were both fans of a movie called The Thing, which is an old black and white horror movie.
My favorite horror movie.
In which you don't see the monster until like halfway through the movie.
Right.
And with us, we said, well, we don't have a monster. We got a fin, but we don't have the whole thing with teeth and all. So let's do what they did in The Thing, which is show the results of the monster's activity. Let's have some suspense as to where the monster, where will it strike again? How will it strike? All we know it's capable of terrible damage right from the opening scene. So we'll tease them along because we have to.
And until then, it's about the people talking to each other and telling each other stories and having a relationship, and we'll just keep doing that until it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, that must have been maddening to have to do that.
We always said it was Moby Dick meets Enemy of the People. Melville and Ibsen.
Let's say this. The difficulty of that movie, and maybe you did it in a way that you wouldn't normally write a movie, do you think that it made other movies after easier for you in that was a pretty difficult situation? So somebody just says, hey, I need you to write a movie, and you're like, oh, great. You just want me to sit down and write a movie? Here you go.
Yeah. Compared to that, it was a great baptism by fire. It's like, I want to join the army. Fine. Welcome to Gettysburg. If you survive that, then you'll be a pretty good soldier.
Well, it sounds like you and Spielberg were kind of parallel like that.
Yeah.
Because for him, it must have been the same.
Absolutely. His career was on the line.
Yeah.
He had directed one feature that was critically well received, but a box office failure. And he needed a popular hit, which is why he picked that script.
Thinking about the process of what you did then, what you do now, do you think that you've been consistent with how there's an idea, and this is how I'm going to tell this idea, and it's going to end up being like this, and I'm going to do it in this way? Or do you shift? Do you change still?
Every enterprise is its own challenge. Some things I would love to make a movie with a team of filmmakers again, working like an improvisational theater group with a guy who's responsible for the camera and a guy who's responsible for the art direction and a guy who's responsible for the editing. I'm going to be responsible for the words and the story, and everybody's got input, and we'll work it out, and the actors will be our friends who we trust to know what they're doing, and if they have a suggestion that we haven't thought of, we'll integrate it into what we're doing. I would love to make a movie that way. With someone in charge, preferably myself, but at least with a perhaps with a guiding authority. I don't know who that would be, But I'd like to do it that way. I'd also like to write something where I hand it to the director and say, "Here, shoot this just the way it is, please. Don't make it better, thank you. Don't make me come back and take out the improvements." Because as a writer, I've often had the experience of writing something that an actor or a director, or an actor and a director, will think they're making it better because they had a good idea on the set, or the actor ad-libs something and they go with that. And at which point you want to grab them in a grip of steel and say, "Excuse me, don't you think I thought of that? Do you think I just wrote the first thing that came into my head? No, this was the result of a lot of, process, and your change is something that I thought of and discarded for reasons I don't even remember. But, just do it the way it's written. It'll be fine." Because I've seen, really gifted performers. I remember I wrote some material for Dudley Moore once for a benefit, a comic monologue at the piano, which was something he could do perfectly well. And he did it. And then the audience got a little restless, not because of anything I'd written, because I don't know whether it was his performance, for whatever reason. He decided to become cute Dudley Moore and started playing with the words and ignoring the dialogue that I'd written, and went straight in the toilet. And then when he went back to the words, he got the audience back, and they all applauded at the end. And I'm thinking to myself, why did he have to do that? Why did he depart for a moment? It's because the actors don't trust the material. That's this is a business which is very much like trapeze. It's you have to trust your fellow artists. Let the writer do the writing, you do the acting, somebody else will do the directing, the editor will cut it together, composer will put a nice score under it. You'll have a nice movie. Let everybody do their job. Don't do everybody's job for them, unless you're Orson Welles, and even he didn't do it that well after Citizen Kane.
It's funny because I was just talking to a comic professional who's a comic book writer, and we were talking about how he had to change. A lot of the writers and artists are changing now in comics in that they are having to do my job. So because they don't have the same level of promotion, agents, managers, they go to these comic book conventions and they sit down and they have to promote themselves, and they stand up and shake hands and, "Hey, would you like to read my book? And there's 2 for 1 today," or whatever it is they do. And they publish their own things themselves because publishers will not take a chance. So they do it themselves. And they come to me in my store and they say, "Here, I published this thing. You want to carry it in the store?" And I look at it and I go, "It looks great. How much is it?" And they say, $20. And I say, "How do I know? You didn't put the price on it."
Ooh.
And they, "Oh, well, at the shows, I just put it on the table with a sign and it says, $20, but today, $18. And I say, "Well, I'm a show every day, 363 days a year, and I need a price on this thing." Because people pick up something, they got $20 in their pocket, they need it. Matter of fact, it looks so nice that it looks like it should be more. And if I picked it up and didn't have a price on it, I would go, "I can't afford this." And I'd put it back on the shelf. Wow, I didn't think about that. And I said, "Well, why should you? That's my job."
Yeah.
And yet they are forced to do my job for me. And yet if I walked up to you and said, "Oh, hey, Carl, I've never written a screenplay before, but I got to write one now. So I'm just going to do that because I have to." And that's going to be, you'd say, "You're crazy."
Good luck to you.
Yeah, good luck, kid.
There's a great line. Just a moment. He's a bit player in a movie called Guns of Navarone. Some stuffy supply officer has given our heroes a collection of their stuff to go on this adventure with. And he doesn't know what the job is. He just says, "Here's, 60 pounds of dynamite. Here's the machine gun. Here's the boat. Here's your foul weather gear." And they're getting on a boat. And he says in this really typical British Colonel Blimp fashion, he says, "And good luck to you." And that's a little gift that I would love to just put in all my correspondence with aspiring writers and producers and directors. "And good luck to you, lad."
You've been doing what you're doing for a long time, but you also became very active in the rights of creators in the WGA and many other things that you've done, which is about you've changed things quite a bit. You've helped to usher in some things that didn't exist before.
I like to say I was around when those things got done.
Okay.
I don't take any credit.
Well, you had a hand in them. I have
That's
to.
peripheral vision. I saw it.
Do you think that over the course of the time that you started becoming more active in the rights of creators, that it affected you at all in the eyes of the people who were hiring and firing? Were they afraid of you, a little bit afraid of you because of what you were doing? Were they upset that you were trying to get people more money or give them more credits? Or
I could, in a more paranoid moment, think of a conspiracy theory that being active and visible in the Writers Guild can be a career killer. At the same time, some of our most vocal advocates who work on the behalf of the community of writers are writers who are so good that the studios want or need to be in business with them, so they'll listen to them. That's why we get Billy Ray and Sean Ryan, active showrunners with network show. Matt Weiner just got elected to the board. Guys who they can't hurt, who they need.
Right.
But, it's not a good thing, but there might be some times when my activism hurt me. I don't know that. But at the same time, you're doing the right thing. You're working on behalf of the community of writers. So, who cares what the consequences are?
Right.
It's frequently expressed, you'll never work in this town again. But the corollary is that the actual saying is, you'll never work in this town again until I need you. And then.
Well, during the strikes, the writer strikes, and people who don't live here can't really understand what it's like unless you're sort of living in it and the heat of it.
Yep. There's
Lines that are drawn, and very distinctive lines that are drawn, and people's real opinions come out. They become, look what's happening in our world right now, in our country. People are speaking their minds. And like Maya Angelou said, if somebody tells you who they are, believe them.
Yeah.
And during times like that, you hear people saying things that define who they are.
Yeah, sadly. In most cases, sadly.
Yeah. I remember during the last writer's strike, my previous store, Sherman Oaks, it was going on for a long time. It was very hot outside. I had a lot of producers and directors and writers who would not normally come in, but now they had time on their hands. And they were looking for things that they might make into movies or TV shows. And they came in all the time because they were just sort of kicking around town, And they'd come in and they would all be sort of mashed together, but nobody knew who each other was. And it was a Wednesday. It was New Comic Day. All the new comics were coming out. And it was a busy day, and everybody was at the comic book racks, grabbing their things. And I heard a conversation, and one guy said to another guy, God, these goddamn producers, I wish they would. And he just started really letting it out, like, I gotta go to work. I gotta, And a guy next to him turned and said, you know what? It's not the producers. It's you writers. That's what it is. And I'm so tired of hearing that. And he was pointing his finger in the guy's face. And the two of them started like shouting at each other at the comic book racks. And I had to be like a bartender. I slammed my hand on the counter. I said, hey, take it outside. You're in a comic book store. This is Switzerland in here. Get out. And they sort of were shocked, and everybody started clapping, and they were kind of ashamed. And one of the guys, the producer, said, I'm sorry. I said, you're apologizing to the wrong guy. And he apologized to the writer, and the writer was like, yeah, I'm sorry. I said, hey, it's all good here. Here's where you come to escape from all that's happening out there on the hot sidewalk. Yeah. And it was amazing how it just came into the comic book store. And if that was the case, where else was it coming into? And it was everywhere.
Well, it's like, if you're in Flint, Michigan, when the Ford company, River Rouge, is going on strike, and the fucking Pinkertons and the National Guard are shooting people on the strike line dead, then there's a lot at stake. It's management labor. I mean, there's a reason Marx wrote Das Kapital, because there's a difference between the workers and the bosses.
Right.
And because it's entertainment is an industry, there are bosses.
Yes.
And there are workers. And sadly, writers are, for the most part, workers, but they can become bosses by virtue of their work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a coal miner can't own a coal mine no matter how good a digger he is at coal. A writer can own his coal mine if he comes up with a couple of nuggets and gets an actor like James Gandolfini in his work. All of a sudden, he owns the mine. You know, he owns the means of production. It's a weird. It's no accident that the early Writers Guild and activists were all communists, because they understood class struggle. And in the old studio days, there was a real division between management and labor.
And in the old studio days, what they were most afraid of was communism.
Yeah. Even from what I've read, I don't know the comic book industry that well, but in the early days, Stan Lee, despite his burnishing his image over the last decade or so, was something of a pig of a boss, as from what I can tell, as were the guys who took Superman from the creators. The doctrine of work for hire is kind of a pernicious. You know, that's a whole show in itself. Let's not get into that now, because I'm starting to fade.
Oh, I've got plans. Don't worry. Well, look, this was a wonderful, wonderful chat, and I really think that there is a lot to glean from this, a lot to learn. I hope that all of you out there really paid attention, and if you haven't, that's what the rewind button is for. Carl, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to do this.
Thank you. You've touched a lot of chords in me. I hope I haven't overspoke.
Not at all. Not at all. It was a really wonderful thing. I'm very, very grateful for it. The Blastoff podcast is produced by the Colonel, Jeff Fox, Scott Tipton, and me. Original music is composed and performed by Derek Anthony Gray. You can find more of his musical compositions on his website, DerekAnthonyGray.com.
For more information about anything you've heard us talk about today, check us out online at BlastoffComics.com. We have an active Facebook presence, so check us out over there on Facebook. And you can reach us on Twitter at BlastoffComics or on Instagram.
Or you can come by our retail location in North Hollywood in the heart of the Arts District, 5118 Lankershim Boulevard in North Hollywood, just 2 blocks south of Magnolia. See you soon.